They dressed her in white before the blood, as if innocence could be stitched into a dying body. The cold stone beneath her bare feet remembered every queen who walked it before her. Anne's final breath still lived in the cracks. The air was heavy with perfumes meant to hide the stench of rot, but nothing could cover the scent of betrayal. It clung to her hair like a veil, sweet and spoiled. They called her a rose, but she bloomed too fast, and the thorns drew blood not from lovers, but from the crown itself. Catherine Howard was not born with a crown. She danced into it barefoot, naive, the fifth wife to a king who had murdered love into silence. Her laughter was too loud for corridors meant for whispers, and her eyes lingered too long on shadows that were meant to pass. She kissed danger with the soft lips of a girl who thought men only burned with passion, not cruelty. The court loved her at first because she gave the illusion of spring in a palace ruled by frost. But she did not know the rules were written in bone. The king was old, heavy with sin and swollen with power. He watched her like a dying god watches a flame, hungry, envious, disbelieving. In her, he saw time's mockery, and behind her smile, the court saw the threat of youth that does not beg permission to shine. They whispered. They waited. They pulled the floor from beneath her with silk-gloved hands. She had sinned, perhaps. Or perhaps she had only reminded them all of what it cost to live brightly in a world ruled by decay. Now the axe waits. The scaffold is washed clean, but blood lives in the grain. Catherine stands there already in the minds of those who betrayed her, naked in soul, adorned in fear, not a queen, not a girl, only a body about to become a lesson, a ghost before the blade ever falls. She was not raised in majesty, nor forged in cold ambition like those who circled the throne with practiced poise. Catherine Howard was a bloom from the shallow soil of scandal and seduction, plucked too soon and too eagerly by hands that never meant to water her. The scent of her name was not yet thick in the corridors of power when it first began to unravel behind her, thread by thread. She was merely a girl sent to the Duchess's house to be forgotten among the other daughters of noble blood and no wealth. There, in the dim chambers of Lambeth, where the walls were more ears than stone, she learned too quickly that silence did not protect it, only punished. She was watched, touched, whispered to. Fingers reached for her when candles dimmed, and she learned to smile through discomfort, to laugh where no joy lived. She became fluent in the language of glances, the economy of desire, the invisible tax a woman pays in exchange for presence. She had nothing but her body, and her body was praised, envied, scorned. The other girls watched her like a flame they both feared and longed to touch. Even then, in that half-light world of forgotten wards and leering men, Catherine moved as if the world belonged to her. She wasn't taught virtue, she was taught survival with powdered cheeks and lowered lashes. When she came to court, she did not enter, she appeared, like music before a scream, like spring on a battlefield. The courtiers laughed louder when she passed. The candles burned brighter, and the king, heavy as a dying sun, turned his gaze upon her and mistook the glow of youth for the grace of destiny. He saw her body as a chalice he might drink from and become young again. He mistook her ignorance for innocence, her vivacity for virginity. He believed that marrying her would wash the blood from his throne. Catherine knew no better. She wore the crown like a ribbon in her hair, fluttering without weight. She did not understand the throne she stepped upon was built of corpses. She laughed in rooms that had buried queens. She touched the hand of a man whose fingers had pulled rings from cold flesh. The court watched her rise with the breathless awe of wolves circling a lamb who wanders joyfully into their den. They gave her music and pearls, and she gave them distraction. She danced. She smiled. She pretended not to hear the rumors that followed her like trailing perfume. The queen was beautiful, they said, but her past was loud. The tapestries whispered of Manox and Dirham, names worn like bruises beneath silks. She did not know how to scrub history from skin. Even as queen, she carried the scent of bedrooms not blessed by church or crown. Yet she glowed, not like a star, like a candle about to be blown out. The ladies around her bowed with the honeyed words, but their eyes were knives wrapped in lace. Even her cousin, Jane Rochford, the widow of the beheaded George Boleyn, fed her sweet poison in the form of confidences. The court itself was not a palace, but a labyrinth of mirrors, each reflection twisted to show only what the king wanted to see. And the king, swollen, suppurating, breath like rotting meat, still thought himself Jupiter. He believed that if he married a maiden, he might cleanse the sin of the past, might conquer time, might be reborn. Catherine fed that delusion with every curtsy. But the courtiers saw her not as queen, but as entertainment, a brief distraction from the cold calculations of their ambitions. Norfolk, her uncle, pushed her into the king's path like a gambler betting his last coin. No one thought she would last. She was too light, too young, too loud. And yet, for a time, she did. She captivated him. She kissed his ulcered legs and told him he was strong. She sang while he gritted his teeth through the night. She played the part of dutiful wife with trembling grace, even as her eyes wandered to younger men, unspoiled by age and guilt. Culpeper, Derham, names carved in fear behind locked lips. The king slept, but the walls did not. They listened. They remembered. Catherine's laughter, once her weapon, became her crime. Her footsteps, once music, became evidence. A queen who laughs too freely, they said, must be hiding something. And the court, bored, brutal, starved for scandal, began to circle. The Duchess of Norfolk, too old for illusions, warned her in glances. But Catherine had been trained to read desire, not danger. She did not know when to whisper. She did not know how to bury her past. The old women who cleaned her chambers shook their heads and said prayers not for her protection, but for her soul. Even the jewels began to look like chains. She wore diamonds on her throat, not knowing they would soon be traded for a collar of iron. The king, once bewitched, began to see her not as salvation, but as mockery. The spells wore off. The youth he thought he possessed through her began to sneer at him. She walked too quickly. She spoke too eagerly. She forgot he was a god. And then the letters were found whispers wrapped in parchment. The past, no longer buried, was dug up and laid bare before the throne. The girl who had danced became a woman accused. The walls closed in. The court grew silent. Even the wind outside the palace seemed to hold its breath. Catherine was seized like a criminal. Not a queen. No trial. Only questions. No defense. Only fear. She was kept in a chamber with walls that oozed damp silence, stripped of silks, fed on cold bread and the taste of her own heartache. The king did not come. He sent no word. He who once called her his rose now called her his ruin. Her friends vanished. Her enemies multiplied. The doors that once opened at her touch now groaned closed behind bolts and guards. She cried out for mercy, but mercy was no longer fashionable. The same voices that once sang her praises now rehearsed her eulogy. Jane Rochford, her partner in secrets, broke under the weight of guilt or madness. It mattered little which. She raved in her cell, blood beneath her fingernails. Eyes rolled back in horror. Catherine was left to imagine her own end. No priest came to comfort her. No sister to weep beside her. Only silence, thick and suffocating, the prelude to judgment. And yet, even then, she did not scream. She waited. Each tick of time carved deeper into her youth. The mirror no longer showed a queen, only a girl too tired to cry, too cold to pray. She clutched a crucifix carved in wood, but the wood splintered, and the blood came, and it felt too much like truth. She had once believed in love, in beauty, in forgiveness. But the tower teaches other lessons. Beneath its weight, hope rots faster than flesh. Her name was no longer Catherine. It was traitor. It was adulteress. It was whore. She wrote a final letter to the king, begging only to live. But the letter was never read. The king had already summoned the axe. The court whispered again, this time in lower tones, as if speaking her name might awaken something terrible. She had risen like a blossom, but now she fell like a feather soaked in blood. The child queen, who once laughed in silk, now sat on stone, waiting to die. No crown, no perfume, no warmth, only breath. And even that would soon be taken. The tower did not sleep as Catherine waited to be erased. Its stones breathed, moaned, listened. She was not the first girl to sit beneath its shadow, and the walls remembered better than men. They remembered screaming queens and silent ghosts. Catherine, still so young her fingers bore no rings of time, sat with her back against the chill and her future pooling at her feet like spilt wine. Outside, the court spun its webs, lacquered in ceremony and sin. Inside, her name passed through the lips of rats and ravens, each syllable worn thin with fear. Conspiracy did not come with swords. It came in the rustle of skirts, the closing of doors, the ink on parchment long since dry. Thomas Culpepper's eyes had once flicked across hers like a promise made of danger. His fingers had brushed hers in the garden as if they were equals, not pawns. The way he looked at her was the way the king never could, not with hunger, but with fire. In those stolen glances, Catherine saw something real, though she had never been taught the price of reality in a world ruled by myth. She thought she could love and still wear a crown. She thought she could remember her past and not be punished for it. She thought she was more than a name on a list to be crossed out. But the king's men were always watching. They did not need to see the crime, only the possibility. Her past with Francis Dereham, the boy who touched her before the palace did, was resurrected like a corpse brought forth for public shaming. He was dragged from his obscurity, broken beneath interrogation, made to speak of laughter and linen sheets, of kisses and things that should never have names. Catherine's innocence was measured not in truth, but in how loudly others denied it. And no one denied it loudly enough. She was betrayed not just by those she touched, but by those who stood silent when the knives came. Jane Rochford, mad with guilt or perhaps clarity, confessed too much, then recanted, then collapsed into madness so complete the tower itself grew still. Her mind unraveled like silk in flame, screaming through the corridors as if her voice could rewrite fate. It could not. The council gathered in secret, and one by one, they assembled the noose with words. Norfolk, the uncle who had once advanced her, now stepped back in measured horror, washing his hands with silence. The king, bloated with rage, wept not for love, but for humiliation. He had believed her pure. To find otherwise was not grief, it was insult. And Henry VIII did not forgive insults. He did not bleed like other men. He bled kingdoms. He ordered Francis Dereham to be hanged, drawn, and quartered, the ancient ritual of royal vengeance. They carved the confession from his body, as if pain could purify memory. Culpepper, more careful, more clever, was spared the full agony and given only the axe. But even as his head fell, his eyes searched the sky as if expecting her forgiveness. Catherine heard of it all in fragments, whispers from her jailer, the shuffle of feet outside her door, the sudden stillness of the crows. No one said her name aloud now, not in kindness, not in hate. It had become an omen. Her execution was not merely a sentence, it was a performance. Every detail mattered. The scaffold was built high, where all could see the fall of a queen turned danger. They stitched her gown with care, but did not allow her to choose it. They painted her face, though none would look her in the eye. The morning of her death, she asked for the block to be brought to her chamber, not out of fear, but precision. She wanted to know how to kneel, how to die without faltering. She wanted to make a clean exit from a play that had mocked her at every turn. They granted it, and in the darkness, by the light of a flickering torch, she placed her neck upon it and whispered something no one heard. Some said she practiced, others said she prayed. The guards turned away, not from pity, but from shame. She was too small for such an ending. On the day itself, the sky did not weep, it watched, cold, pale, unmoved. The crowd gathered like a slow tide, murmuring not with anger, but with a hunger for spectacle. They came not to mourn, but to consume. Catherine walked barefoot, not from penance, but because the shoes they gave her did not fit. She looked not like a queen, but like a girl in a dream she could not wake from. Her hair was pinned back, her hands clasped in front of her, not in prayer, but to keep them from shaking. She ascended the scaffold with the grace of someone who had danced too many times to stumble now. She spoke briefly. No rehearsed poetry, only stillness, and one clear sentence: I die a queen, but I would rather have died the wife of Culpeper. Gasps followed, but the air swallowed them. Her executioner, chosen for steadiness rather than mercy, looked at her as one might look at a statue about to shatter. She laid her head upon the block, eyes open, breath steady. The axe rose not like judgment, but like a secret kept too long, and then silence, brief and endless. When the blade came down, it was not just her neck it severed. It cleaved history. It split the illusion of youth and power. Blood soaked the wood, and still, the crowd did not look away. The head was taken, the body removed, the block scrubbed for the next performance. But something remained, a chill that settled over the court like mildew, a fear that even beauty could be punished, that even laughter could be fatal. The tower kept her final breath, stored in stone, exhaled only on certain nights when no one dares to speak of queens. The king did not attend. He married again, as if erasure were a form of healing. But his gait changed. His smile grew brittle. Those who served him began to fear mirrors. They said they sometimes heard footsteps in the long gallery, barefoot and soft. A girl humming a tune no one recognized. The letters Catherine wrote were burned, the portraits destroyed, the lineage denied. But history, like guilt, is stubborn. Her name returned in whispers, in dreams, in the shaking hands of future queens. Catherine Howard did not die for treason. She died because she reminded a kingdom that its king could be deceived. She died because she touched what was forbidden and did not tremble. She died because power fears joy it cannot command. She died beautifully, terribly, and completely. And the court, for all its cruelty, never laughed quite the same again. The days before the end passed not in hours, but in echoes, each one colder than the last, as if time itself had grown weary of touching her. Catherine Howard, once draped in silk and laughter, now wore silence as a shroud, her world reduced to the damp breath of the tower and the slow decay of memory. She moved less with each sunrise, her limbs hollowed by dread, her fingers curled not in prayer but in resignation. The girl who had once danced through corridors was now a ghost within stone, her presence too quiet to disturb even the rats that lingered beneath her cot. There were no visitors. No priest came to absolve her, no mother to comb her hair or whisper forgiveness. The women assigned to serve her did so without speaking, as though words themselves would break against her skin. And Catherine did not speak either. Not anymore. She listened. She listened to the creak of wood, the clatter of distant armor, the weeping of someone 2 cells down who would not live long enough to forget their name. Outside, the city thrummed on, unaware of how close a queen had come to vanishing without a sound. Within the court, her name became a curse too sharp to say aloud, a blemish on the tongue of every noble who had once toasted her. They burned her letters, tore her likeness from canvas, and in the quietest chambers, some knelt to thank the Lord that their own secrets had not been dragged into daylight. But Catherine, who once feared shame more than steel, now feared nothing. There was no dignity left to defend. She had been unmade. Her body ached not from torture, but from stillness. Her thoughts unraveled like a tapestry caught in fire, and still, she remembered. She remembered the gardens, the scent of orange blossoms in spring, the heavy touch of Culpepper's hand against hers beneath the moonlight, the way he had looked at her as though she were not already doomed. She remembered laughter, the real kind, from before the palace swallowed her, and she remembered the first time the king touched her, not as a man, but as a myth, immense and dripping with rot. His eyes swollen with a need too old to be gentle. He had pressed himself into her life like ink onto flesh, permanent, inescapable. And she had smiled. She had always smiled. Now her mouth was still. Her final nights were lit by candle ends and the rustle of paper she could no longer write upon. No more begging, no more hope. She asked only for one thing: to die with grace. They granted her no farewell, no companion to walk with her to the edge. When morning came, they dressed her in the same linen she had worn while imprisoned. The gown hung loose around her, as if it too had given up. She was led, not dragged, and her steps were steady, not brave, but numb. The tower green waited, damp with dew, and the block had been set as if the wind itself knew what was coming. The crowd was thinner than expected. Executions had grown tedious to the nobles who once craved blood like wine. Still, some came, wrapped in cloaks and cold hearts, eyes eager for the moment history would change again. Catherine's hands were bound loosely. She would not run. There was nowhere to go. She looked skyward once, not with faith, but with longing, as if she might climb into the gray itself and vanish. A single raven circled above, disinterested. The executioner stepped forward, his eyes lined with the knowledge of too many beheadings. He offered no words, no blessing, only the block and the blade. Catherine nodded once, and then she knelt. No tears, no trembling. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet enough that only the crows could hear "God have mercy on my soul." Her hair had been tucked away, but a strand escaped, curling like smoke against her cheek. She laid her neck upon the block as though returning something borrowed. The executioner raised his weapon, but time seemed to pause, just for a breath. In that silence, the world remembered her, not as queen, not as traitor, but as girl. A girl who had laughed too brightly, lived too openly, and wandered into the mouth of a lion wearing a ribbon and a smile. The blade fell, not with fury, but with finality. And in that instant, Catherine Howard left her name behind. The crowd dispersed without a word. The sky did not change. The tower swallowed her body, buried without fanfare, without monument. Her grave was shared with others' queens, criminals, wives, all level in the end. But something of her lingered, stitched into the stones and the breathless corners of the palace. They said you could feel her on cold nights, in rooms once warmed by her laughter. They said her footsteps echoed sometimes in empty halls, not loud but insistent, as if memory itself refused to be quieted. The king remarried. Of course, he dined, he danced, he laughed too loudly at jokes no one dared to explain. But something in him had shifted, an absence sharp as glass. He aged faster, his ulcer worsened, his appetite soured. He could not bear the sound of certain songs, nor the scent of roses. He forbade the name Catherine to be spoken in his presence. Yet in the dead hours of the night, he would wake and call for her, eyes wild, lips trembling, as if he expected to find her sitting at the foot of his bed, barefoot and alive. But ghosts do not comfort. They accuse, and Catherine's ghost did not weep. It watched, it waited, and through the years, as queens came and went, as the throne cracked and empires shifted, her story remained not in books, but in fear. Every woman who walked those halls felt it, a chill at the neck, a hand that had once worn a crown reaching back through time. No monument bears her truth, no sermon redeems her name. But in the silence between footsteps, in the cold hush of morning fog, Catherine Howard breathed still, not as a queen, but as a warning. A lesson carved not in marble, but in shadow. The axe was cleaned, the blood was scrubbed from the wood, but not from memory. Catherine Howard did not leave a legacy written in ink or law. She left something far more permanent, a breath held too long, a door shut too softly, a chill that settles in the bones of young women who smile too brightly in corridors where power sleeps with its eyes open. They buried her with no name chiseled in stone, no prayers spoken above her bones, only the sound of silence too thick to breathe. And still, she is not forgotten. She lingers not as legend, but as dread. A girl queen, draped in light, undone by shadows. They say on certain mornings, when the mist curls low over the Thames and the tower groans under the weight of its ghosts. Her steps can be heard barefoot, deliberate, echoing toward the scaffold that still remembers her softness. She died with her eyes open, and perhaps that is why they still see her in the places where mirrors crack and laughter cuts like glass. Hers was not the death of a traitor, nor the death of a queen. It was the death of a question that power cannot answer. What happens when beauty will not kneel, when joy will not obey? The answer was silence, then steel, and now only a girl's whisper behind stone, asking a kingdom why it needed her to bleed just to remember she was real.